a very deep question. Brahmacharya means you are a student of Brahman. It means one is dedicated to serving the Absolute. And that one is not yielding to lower desires and fears. And that one finds the meaning and the purpose and the bliss of one's life in the surrender of one's ego consciousness to the Supreme Being. Now, at each different level of one's process, a different organizing principle comes into being. And at the lower levels, the lower assemblage points, even when one has entered into this field of exploration of one's true self, one begins in a state of inner conflict. And so one cannot be Brahmachari if one is at the dispossession point. One can wish one was Brahmachari, but it won't happen. I happened to see the news yesterday of a priest who had to quit the Catholic Church because he fell in love with a woman, right? He didn't want to. He actually approves of celibacy, which is another way of understanding Brahmachari, but he couldn't follow it. And so if one forces oneself to be Brahmachari before one is ready, one is then torn apart, tormented, and the unconscious mind actually takes one further away from Brahman than closer. And so one has to be true to one's own understanding of one's own ego, where it is on the map of one's development. And if there is great wisdom, if that priest perhaps could have processed his desires with someone else in the church who would have been able to help him move to a higher assemblage point and withdraw the projections that he had put onto that woman, perhaps there would have been no need to act out what he did. But he did, okay? And they didn't have that kind of structure and counseling available for priests. And so to take a vow while one is at an assemblage point where one does not have mastery over one's unconscious mind will simply lead to a failure and a short-circuiting and a torment, a sense of guilt, a sense of failure. And so one has to know oneself. One has to know what one is truly prepared to commit oneself to. And part of the training that we do in Sat Yoga is to help one to understand oneself. Before one can ever take successfully a vow of Brahmacharya, one must have achieved a certain level of purification of the unconscious, so that when the residues of desire that still get projected out onto human others or onto other kinds of desire for achievement, prestige, status in the social realm of Maya, that one is able to understand and to process and to sublimate those desires, as well as the fears that are subjacent to those desires. Fear of death, fear of losing one's identity, fear of the negative kind of emptiness. And in the movement of one's assemblage point, through the authentic exploration of those unconscious complexes, one can reach the point where Brahmacharya is actually possible. And once it becomes possible, one wouldn't want anything else. the desires and fears of the ego have no longer any interest to one, and they drop away. It doesn't require a vow at that point, because one's desire will have become so one-pointed toward God. The bliss will have become so incredibly overwhelming that the lower pleasures actually are painful in many cases. Or they are part of one's horizontal dharma. If one is in a marriage relationship, if one is in a relationship of responsibility, professionally, in the family, etc., there are certain dharmas that require to be fulfilled. But it is all within the context of serving the Absolute.